Now, we've had a lot of new people joining us here on the channel in recent times, and to all of you, welcome. It's great to have you here. My name is Mark. I'm a Kiwi rugby fan who's living in beautiful Cancun in Mexico, and my goal with this channel is to help the game of rugby grow across the world and play a small role in doing that. So if you want to help me out, here are some of the ways that you can help me out, and by getting us all connected, we can grow the beautiful game that we love, both for men and women across the world. All my regular viewers, welcome back. It's great to have you here. Thank you for your comments. Keep them coming. There's been some fantastic things coming through in the comments recently. Now, as you know, if you've been watching my videos in the last 24 hours, you'll know that I'm making a couple of videos about the upcoming series in the Rugby Championship between the South African Springboks and the New Zealand All Blacks, to be played in South Africa. The first game, of course, less than 2 weeks away now, going to be played in Johannesburg at Ellis Park. And then the second game will be played in Cape Town at the DHL Stadium. So yesterday I reviewed the South African prep for this series. I gave my views and opinions on how I thought it's going to play out in terms of the preparation that Rassie and his crew are going to be using for that series. And today I'm going to be talking about the All Blacks and having a look at perhaps what Scott Robertson and his crew will be doing in terms of preparation for those games against South Africa. Make sure you leave your comment with your ideas, thoughts, and everything around what I've said in my videos. If I've missed something out, don't hesitate to pick me up on it. And of course, if I pronounce a player's name wrong, jump in there and tell me how I should be doing it. Okay, so there were some fantastic comments put in yesterday on the video I made about the South African preparation for this series. So I'm hoping and I'm expecting the same's going to happen today. Plenty of great ones. So we'll start off with a little bit of history, and the history is that in Johannesburg, over the last 5 games between these two teams, the All Blacks have won 4, the Springboks have won 1, and that game the South Africans won was by a 2-point margin. Now, I know a lot of the South Africans are going to say, yeah, but we're a better team now, we're back-to-back world champions and all that stuff. Look, what I'm trying to point out very clearly is that there's nothing in it between these two teams. And if you look at the score lines in those games, you'll realise that as well. And of course, the last time they played in that Rugby World Cup final, there was just 1 point in it between these two teams. So a huge amount of respect between the South African Springboks and the New Zealand All Blacks, and I expect that to continue on this series. I think it's going to be a very, very knife-edge series. I think it's going to be very close. But in this video, I'm going to talk about where I think the battles might be had. Now, I mentioned those wins because I think Scott Robertson will be reminding this group that he's going to take to South Africa, so it helps their psychology. This is not an impossible task. This is not something that these All Blacks need to fear in terms of hopping on that plane and flying over to Johannesburg thinking they don't have any chance. They've got a very good chance of beating the Springboks if they do some things very, very well. And when I talk about psychology, I think it's going to be important for the All Blacks to embrace that first period of play they had in that second game against Argentina and understand how they were able to execute that and what they did leading up to that game. And if you've been watching a lot of Scott Robertson's press conferences, you'll hear him talking about the weekly preparation heading into these test matches is absolutely vital. And I think that's going to be the case again now when the All Blacks go to South Africa. The week leading up to the games is going to be very important to make sure that each of the players are really in the zone and ready to do their job in these games against the Springboks. So psychology is going to be important. Understanding that the All Blacks can win in South Africa and have done so on a number of occasions, I think is going to help this team in terms of self-belief. Okay, and then the next thing I want to talk about is some of the matchups that are going to be really important in this series, and a lot of you have been mentioning it in the comments, and I agree with a lot of what you've been saying, some of you, and I think it's going to be really interesting when we get down to team selection. So that's why I'm not going to talk about game-specific strategy at the moment. What I'm talking about in these videos is just the preparation and some of the thought processes that might go into the coaching management side of it in terms of getting their teams ready for these two games and what they need to look out for, particularly from the opposition. Now, the All Blacks are going to go to South Africa knowing that the Springboks forwards are going to be a handful, and they're going to have to come up with solutions on how they're going to be able to try to dominate certain sections of the game to give them sufficient ball to be able to put a score on the board that's going to win them the game. Now, I'm a big believer that you don't have to dominate for 80 minutes in a game to win a game. You need to have sufficient periods of the game where you get good quality ball that then you can put points on the scoreboard. We saw this in Auckland at Eden Park versus Argentina with the All Blacks. They were absolutely dominant for that first 45-50 minutes of that game, and during that period of the game they were able to put enough points on the board to be able to beat Argentina. Now, a lot of us, including myself, have been saying, well, the All Blacks weren't very good in that last 30 minutes of that game. Their bench didn't really continue on the trend, and that's probably a fair assessment to make. But the damage had probably been done, and despite some of you saying the All Blacks probably took their foot off the gas to save themselves for South Africa, I don't buy into that one. I'm sorry. I think the bench has a job to do. They need to come on and they need to show how they can do it. And in that particular game, I don't think the All Blacks bench did the job. But the point here is that if the All Blacks go to South Africa and they're able to dominate 40 or 50 minutes of forward play against the Springboks, they're going to win sufficient amount of ball. It has to be quality ball so the backs can do their thing. So when we're talking about matchups and it comes to the forwards for the All Blacks against the South African team, we have to think about all of the forwards because the front row is going to be crucial. It's going to be very important to see how we're able to power up against the South African pack, and it's going to be interesting to see what South African front row the All Blacks are going to be playing against. Of course, Stephen Kitsoff is back in the fray. Whether or not he's going to get selected, a lot of you from South Africa have been saying that it's too early for him to be thrown back in, and he didn't have a fantastic game last weekend, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But despite whoever it is, the All Blacks can expect a very tough front row, and it's going to be interesting to see whether Ethan de Groot is going to be going with the All Blacks on this trip to South Africa. So front rows, we're going to have to watch out who gets dominance in that area, and also who in the front row is going to be prominent within general play. This is something else we've been seeing a lot of lately. We've been seeing a lot of the players. Cody Taylor, we know for the All Blacks, is one of those players who can do some very good things both at the breakdown and also in general play with his ball handling skills. And I think this is an area where the All Blacks are going to try and shine, is in their ball handling skills against the South African team. On to the locks, and this is going to be a very fascinating aspect of the game as well, because the All Blacks have got to get ball. And are they going to get it from the lineouts? Of course, Eben Etzebeth is going to be a shoe-in for the Springboks, and it's going to be interesting to see who the other lock is. Let me know in the comments who you think the other lock will be, the starting lock for the Springboks. But the All Blacks have got to look at how they're going to get ball off the lineout. Scott Barrett's going to be back into the team, obviously, and then we're going to see who that other lock is going to be. Probably Sam Derry, I would say, because he's been playing so well and he's been doing so well in the lineout. So this is going to be another area where I think Razor's going to really focus his attention. Okay, let's talk loosies now, and this is going to be a really important part of both games in terms of the loose forward selections for the All Blacks. Is Scott Robertson going to play around with the selection in these areas to beef up the strength of the New Zealand loosies? I think he needs to do that. I think we need to see Wallace Satiti in there to give the All Blacks a little bit more beef. I'd like to see Ardie Savea going back to the flank. And we're up against the likes of Peter Steph, Toy, Sia Kolesi, and also Quagga Smith coming in. I expect Ben Jason Dixon probably to start at number 8 for the Springboks. And this is going to be an awesome trio for the All Blacks to go up against. So we saw in that first game against Argentina, the All Black loosies were not up to it. They improved a lot in the second game against Argentina in that first 50 minutes. But they're going to have to go to another level again against the Springboks. The height, the size, the pace, and the weight of that South African loosie trio is going to be something that the All Blacks have to navigate. So I think that Scott Robertson's got to spend some time thinking about this. How is he going to do it? Is it going to be selection based? Or are they going to get those players to play in a specific way? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the video, so keep watching. Okay, so when we're talking about the forwards and the strategic intent of the All Blacks forward pack, we've also got to talk about their forwards coming off the bench, because as we all know, this is going to be a crucial part of both games in South Africa. with the All Blacks trying to nullify the impact of the bomb squad. Now, I haven't been that impressed by the All Blacks bench so far in 2024. I think we need to see a more impactful bench coming in for the All Blacks, and if they play like they did against Argentina in that second half in that second game, then the Springboks are going to have put a lot of pressure on them in the last 20 minutes of the game. So that's an area where I think Scott Robertson needs to have a good think about in terms of who he's going to bring in off the bench to get that impact the All Blacks are going to need in the last 20 minutes of the game, because irrespective of whether South Africa is in the lead or chasing the game, that last 20 minutes is probably going to be very, very vital indeed. And if we have a look at the score lines between the two teams over the recent history, and I'm going back as far as 10-15 years, there's not many points in it, unless we're playing at Twickenham, of course, but there's not many points in it, so it's going to be close, and we're going to have to make sure that we can go the full 80 minutes. So what's Scott Robertson going to do with the backline for New Zealand? Well, this is going to be a really interesting process, isn't it, when we look at both the selection but also the strategy they're going to have to use to beat the South African team. And for me, the South Africans are going to come with the rush defence, so the All Blacks need to be ready for that, and they need to have some plans. And what I saw against Argentina in that first half was very effective, and I liked it because it showed the intent to be creative. Geordie Barrett putting in that little chip kick over the top that gave Damien McKenzie the opportunity to go in for that try, I think is some outstanding play that the All Blacks need to consider in using against the South African team. Now, this does a couple of things. First of all, it turns the rush defence around. It gives the All Blacks a chance to go forward and be contesting in those chip kicks to have an opportunity to put pressure on the South Africans. Without the ball going so deep, it doesn't give the South Africans an opportunity to counter-attack in the true sense of the word. It gives them an opportunity to try and tie the ball up, create a platform and go again, and that's a lot different than someone like a Willie LaRue or one of the South African wingers bringing the ball back to you at pace. So I think the chip kick strategy over top of the rush defence used on different occasions, both across field and also straight up the field, could be very effective from the All Blacks, and I'd like to see them implement that as far as the backs go. Now, as in most games, kicking strategy is going to be vitally important, and not only from general play but also kicking from the tee. As I've mentioned already, the close games between these two teams, so goal kicking is going to be very, very important. So the All Blacks have to have a high percentage of goal kicks being successful, and we all remember how that impacted the outcome of the Rugby World Cup last year. So we need to focus on that, but in terms of kicking in general play, I've just mentioned chip kicks can be possible, but I want to see the All Blacks getting away from these kicks where they go long and deep, but they go straight to a player. They need to find grass. We saw that against Argentina for a little while. It was effective, and we need to do the same thing against the South African team. So if Will Jordan, for instance, and Caleb Clark are going to be our wingers, they need to have the opportunity to be able to contest these balls back deep in the South African territory and have an opportunity for putting a lot of pressure on the South African team. Not many keen teams in World Rugby look very good when they're going backwards with pressure on, and that's something that we saw from Ireland against South Africa, and it's something the All Blacks need to bring to the mentality of the series against the Springboks. They need to put pressure on wherever they can to put the Springboks under pressure and force them into making mistakes. When the Springboks get set with that domination in the forwards and they get good set play, their backs look tremendously good and they can be creative. You've got to take that opportunity away from them and put them under a lot of pressure. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple of high box kicks in the early stages of the first game just to test the South Africans out. And then I think the All Blacks should put that strategy in the locker if it's not working at all. I'd really like to see the All Blacks keep ball in hand. And that's going to get on to my next strategy that I think Scott Robertson and his crew should do for the All Blacks again. Look, I think the major way the All Blacks have got a chance of beating South Africa in this series is to play their natural game, play at pace, play at speed, and execute the skill sets very, very well. That's what All Black teams have done over recent decades, and it's played them off pretty well in terms of win-loss ratios. So I'd like to see this All Black team go to South Africa with the intent of playing some exceptionally fast, physical and expansive rugby. I think that's how you take the wind out of the South African sails. You make them make a lot of tackles, you take their energy reserves down, and you tire out their attacking players. So I'd like to see their wingers doing a lot of tackling, and the All Blacks are going to do this by having a centre pairing that can get the ball out wide. So whether or not Rico Ioane, Anton Leonard-Brown and Geordie Barrett are going to be the guys to do that, I think we need to look at the strategy where we're doing everything we can to play these games at pace. The more expansive we play, the more opportunity we have of getting breaks and not falling into that trap of playing South African style rugby through forward domination. The All Blacks have got to take this and embrace it into their own skill set. They've got exceptional skills. If they're able to do little flip passes, put each other in gaps and run these South Africans rugged for about 50 or 60 minutes of this game, then I think we're going to see the impact the All Blacks can really have. Now, to see that, we need to see that in two different sections of the game. We need to see the All Blacks starting very well, scoring a few tries. We all know what they're like when they're in front runners. We saw it against Argentina again last weekend, and that's the New Zealand style. We need to get early points on the board. The other thing we need to do is we need to be able to have the ability through the backs to be able to score points when the bench comes on. So having a thought about that, Scott Robertson needs to make sure he's got enough weapons on that All Black bench in the back line to come on and be able to score points. That's something that didn't happen for us in recent games. So I'd like to see that as a major consideration going into the All Black strategy. And that's why I think Beauden Barrett is so good at coming in off the bench. However, we're going to need him on the field, and I don't think he's going to be starting on the bench in these games. Let me know what you think around that strategy for the All Blacks coming off the bench as far as their backs are concerned. So there we go. That's what I think the All Blacks need to do. They need to play fast, they need to execute their skill sets very well, and they need to keep trying to run around or through this South African team, putting the pressure on with physicality of speed and also changing the point of direction, keeping the South African defence guessing so they don't have time to set up that rush defence, come up on the All Blacks and just chop them down. So we need to see chip kicks, we need to see wide extensive ball, and even a couple of crossfield kicks as well, and play that Russian roulette with either Cheslin Colby and Will Jordan competing for the ball, and see who can win out on those situations. I think that's another play the All Blacks could go to. Now, something else we have to consider for this series is that there's a number of new All Blacks travelling or will be travelling with the squad to South Africa, players that haven't been in that fierce environment at Ellis Park in Johannesburg before, and Scott Robertson's got to manage this process very well indeed, because those players coming out onto Ellis Park for the first 40 minutes of that game are going to be up against some very, very loud and robust support from the South African fans. And if they haven't been there before and experienced that, that might be something that unnerves some of these players. So Scott Robertson's got to be very mindful of that. He's got to look at who he can bring on in the second half once they've been sitting on that bench for 40 minutes, getting a sense of the atmosphere at Ellis Park. I think that's going to be another crucial period or another crucial element to the preparation the All Blacks put in. You know, I've mentioned it quite a lot in my recent videos that I love the state of world rugby at the moment. We've got those top teams in the top area of world rugby, and I'm talking about South Africa, I'm talking about New Zealand, I'm talking about Ireland. I would also throw France in there as well, and England. And on any given day, any of those teams can beat the others. So the All Blacks need to go to South Africa not thinking that South Africa are invincible at all. And I don't think they'll be believing that for 1 minute. I think they'll be going over there knowing that if they play the game to the level they're capable of playing, they've got a very good chance of beating South Africa, not only in one of these games, but possibly in two of the games. I don't see that happening. I think it's going to be a very tight series, probably one game all. But I think the All Blacks should go there with the mentality that anything is possible in South Africa, even against this extremely experienced and extremely successful South African squad. Now, one of the other things that we need to prep for as well is considering the different types of conditions the All Blacks are going to be playing in. Up on the high veld, of course, in Johannesburg, It's probably going to be dry and hard for that game, but when we get down to Cape Town at sea level, it could be a chance where we get some better weather involved. So of course you'll take those games as they come and what's presented in front of you, but the All Blacks need to have strategies ready for both of those encounters. We saw how well they played in the wet against Argentina in that first half. We also saw how South Africa played against Australia in the wet in Perth last weekend. So I think selections are going to be really critical for the All Blacks in this series against the Springboks. And as I said, the ones that I've got question marks over at the moment is what's going to happen in the loose forwards for the All Blacks and how's Razor going to play that game. And then Damien McKenzie and Beauden Barrett, what's going to happen there? Are we going to see Beauden Barrett in at number 10 for the All Blacks just to give some stability in that first game in Johannesburg and using his kicking skills? Or are we going to see Damien McKenzie be given another opportunity and see whether he can crack open the South African rush defence? A lot on the line there. A lot of you have said in the comments when it comes to halfback for the All Blacks, TJ Perenara is going to start the game, basically because of his experience. And we've got Cortez Ratimer, of course, and whether or not he's going to be on the bench to come on for the All Blacks in the second half of that game in Johannesburg. So a couple of key positional challenges there for Scott Robertson to make sure he gets that right and that the All Blacks are able to start off on the front foot in the first game in Johannesburg. Another area that's going to be very vital in this series is going to be the defensive work of the All Blacks. Again, the loosies coming off those inside channels, depending on who South Africa chooses in their team. I'm expecting we might see Cobus Reinhardt in there for South Africa at halfback. He has a good running game, so we need to be careful of that, as has Grant Williams as well if he gets selected. So we need to be careful in terms of being able to protect those inside channels. Now, if Andre Pollard gets the nod for the Springboks to start at number 10, which could be on the cards, then we need to look at how we're going to bring the ball back from some strategic kicking from him. Although we have seen Pollard in recent games being more expansive in getting the ball out to his backs. So that's going to be another conundrum for the All Blacks to try and maintain. If it's Pollard and we get that kicking game, how are we going to repel that? And if it's Sasha Feinberg, then how are we going to stop his creativity, his bursting little runs, and his great offloads that he can get out to the likes of Damien Diolandi and to Jesse Krill? That's going to be an area that the All Blacks need to really focus on. So the inside channel defence, the 9 and 10 defence, as well as the inside centres as well. Now, I think this is going to be an absolutely fantastic series between two great rugby nations taking each other on. And we're going to learn a lot, aren't we, from these two games on how these two teams are able to respond, particularly for the team that loses that first game. I think that's going to be really interesting to see what happens in Cape Town in the second game. I think it's going to be too close to call. I think the All Blacks can beat South Africa. I'm confident of that, but they have to play at the top of their game. We've only seen that for 50 minutes against the Argentinians. And of course, the South African team is a completely different opposition than what we saw with Argentina. Without being disrespectful to the Argentinian team, they simply didn't show up in game number 2 at Eden Park. So the All Blacks need to bring their A game, and as I've said in this video, I think their chances of winning these games in South Africa comes down to their execution levels and their ability to play the game at pace. If the South Africans are able to slow the game down a little bit, use that domination that they want to get through their forwards, then we're going to see tough work for the All Blacks. So the All Blacks are going to have to come fit, physical and ready to play at pace against the Springboks. I think that's how they do it in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. So there you go. There's my thoughts around how I think the All Blacks need to prep for these games against South Africa. As always, I want you to write in the comments your views and opinions. Maybe address something that I've said in this video, or come up with your own ideas and thoughts around how you think this is going to play out. But let me know, first of all, how you think the All Blacks need to prepare from a strategic point of view, and who are some of the key players you think the All Blacks need to go to make sure they've got any chance in this series against South Africa. I would love to hear from you. Now, we're still a week and a half away or so from the first game in Johannesburg. I'm going to be back with plenty more content about the Rugby Championship coming up. We've got Australia going to Argentina, of course. Let's not forget those two teams. They're going to surprise us, I think, before the end of the year. And as I said, any team on any given day, if they play well enough, they can beat their opposition. So don't forget about Argentina and Australia. I'll be back with plenty more content, so if you're enjoying the content I'm putting out, why not do one of these things that I've got on the screen right now to support me in my journey as I try and play a small role in helping the great game of rugby to grow across the world. As you saw in the comments from the last video, we've got people all over the world watching this channel who love the game of rugby, who respect their opposition, and that's absolutely fantastic to see. Plenty of Kiwis over in this part of the world, both in Central America and South America. Hello to you brothers out there. Hope you're enjoying your time in this part of the world, and also plenty of South Africans in all different places across the world as well. So hello to you all. I hope you're having a fantastic time no matter where you're living across this beautiful globe of ours. Okay, I'll see you all again soon in another video. Until then, stay safe, stay well everyone. Keep enjoying your rugby no matter where you are. And it's time for me to say adios from beautiful Cancun in Mexico. Until next time, bye for now.